Let's think about the first Rolling Stones single and singles and the first EP that they brought out, 1963 going into 1964. As I said earlier, the first single is released in the UK only in June of 1963. The A side of that being Come On, which is a Chuck Berry song. The Chuck Berry song they're covering, Come On, had been released in October of 1961 on Chess Records. It had been a number 38 hit in the UK, but did not chart in the US. So they used that song as their first single, recorded at Olympic Studios in London. And one of the things we're going to do during the course of the 7 weeks is keep track of where things were recorded, because as I said before, since they were licensing these masters, they would move from studio to studio, and where something is recorded kind of makes a difference, especially with regard to sounds and ways in which they're able to work. Anyway, recorded at Olympic Studios in London, produced by Andrew Oldham and Eric Easton at this point, Eric Easton's name being included in the production, engineered by a guy by the name of Roger Savage, and that song was recorded on May the 10th, 1963. So that sort of marks the beginning of the Rolling Stones recording career. Come On, the Chuck Berry song on the A side, as I said, I Want to Be Loved, a Muddy Waters song, which had been released on Chess Records in 1955. Again, so we're seeing already the Chuck Berry song is a sense of a kind of tune that when you listen to it, it sounds very Beatlesque. And in fact, the Rolling Stones didn't like it very much, didn't play it live very much, and kind of disowned it. They didn't really think it was them. But it was a sort of a poppier approach to rhythm and blues than some of the other things that they'd done. Brian Jones was more the traditionalist in the group, maybe not as excited about the Chuck Berry number. So on the other side, you get a Muddy Waters number, and who's more authentic when it comes to Chicago electric blues by Muddy Waters. Listen to Mick Jagger singing that. Listen to the way he shapes the words. You can see that he almost exaggerates what he imagines is an African-American accent on this tune. It's more exaggerated than if you listen to the Muddy Waters original, and you'll see that he's really working at trying to be authentic by using the diction that he thinks is compelling. So that accounts for the first single. As I said, that one gets to number 21 in the UK. Partly through Andrew Loog Oldham doing a certain amount of rigging of the numbers. He would say everybody was doing it, but when they figured out how high a song would go on the charts, it had to do with reports that came in from specific record stores. And if you could figure out what the specific record stores were, you didn't have to sell records everywhere. You just had to make sure you bought enough records in those specific record stores, and that would raise your place on the chart. And of course, once something starts to go up on the chart, that incites sales, and you sort of it kind of snowballs, or you hope it does. And so there was a certain amount of that went into getting it to 21, but nobody was happy with 21. They were looking for a top pop hit. That's what they were going for. So what would happen with this next single was really important. So they go into the studio in July of 1963 to follow up on that Come On, which was released the month before in June. And they record two songs, a Leiber and Stoller song called Poison Ivy, which had been recorded by the Coasters, a fantastic group if you don't know their music. Wonderful stuff. Leiber and Stoller and the Coasters, just great music. Lots of fun, those singles. And that had been released in 1959 in the US, had gone to number 7 on the pop charts, number 1 on the R&B charts, number 15 on the UK charts. They recorded Poison Ivy and another song called Fortune Teller, written under the name Naomi Neville, who is actually Alan Toussaint, the famous New Orleans record producer. It had been, Fortune Teller, originally the B-side to a single by Benny Spellman. The A-side had been called Lipstick Traces. It had only been a number 80 song on the American charts, who had gone to number 28 on the R&B charts. So how sometimes they get to these songs that seem to be relatively unknown to people listening to the radio, even in the United States, is probably an interesting story. But they go on with Poison Ivy and Fortune Teller. They record these things up at the Decca Studios in London, produced again by Eric Easton and Andrew Loog Oldham, and they're not really happy. They think about releasing it as a single in August of 1963, but then they have second thoughts and they withdraw that single. So if you're looking for copies of Poison Ivy and Fortune Teller, if you were looking for them back in the day, not to be found. They pulled those back. It wasn't good enough. This was not going to be the song that was going to take them farther up the charts than Come On had done at number 21 in the UK. So as the story goes, the day was probably October the 7th, 1963, when Andrew Loog Oldham meets up with John Lennon and Paul McCartney and tells them the story of what's been going on with the next single, Poison Ivy and Fortune Teller. They're just not really going to be there. And this is what I mean about Andrew Oldham as producer. He's the one who's concerned about this, right? Yeah, maybe he doesn't know how to twiddle the knobs, he knows this is not going to be the song. It needs to be something else. John and Paul, ever on the lookout to try and sell a song, right? Because that's part of what they're doing for Brian Epstein, writing songs that artists are going to take up. So, well, we've got one that's about half finished if you'd like it. Well, that's great. What are you doing now? Well, nothing. Let's go over to the recording studio. Well, this is the way the story is told. It's probably more complicated than that, but here's how the story is often told. So John and Paul go over to the studio to show the song to the Stones, haven't quite finished it yet, go into another room, right? 20 minutes later, 30 minutes later, they come back with the completed song. The Stones learn the song, they record it. The name of that song is called I Want to Be Your Man. Right? Now they've got a Lennon and McCartney song at the time when the Beatles are really starting to get big. They've got a Lennon and McCartney song to come out with. And if you really want to compare the Rolling Stones style at that time with the Beatles style, compare the Beatles version of I Want to Be Your Man with the Rolling Stones version. What's also interesting is to hear by the way, the Beatles give that song to Ringo to sing, which maybe is not a real sign of respect to the Rolling Stones. But it's interesting to hear John and Paul trying to write something they think is in that kind of blues revival, Muddy Waters kind of style, and that's kind of what they were doing with I Want to Be Your Man. The B side of that is a song called Stoned, which I'll say a little bit more about in just a minute. Anyway, I Want to Be Your Man is released and goes to number 12 in the UK charts in November of 1963. This is certainly a much better showing than 21, and so the Stones are certainly, the trajectory is in the right direction. Let me say a little bit about the B-side. The B-side is a song called Stoned, and it is attributed, the songwriting is attributed to Nanker Felge. Now, Nanker Felge is a made-up name for all 5 of the Rolling Stones. At this point, remember, Ian Stewart is kind of out of the group because he didn't fit the image that Andrew Loog Oldham was presenting of the group. So he's out of the group as a performer, but as I said earlier, kind of working backstage as the kind of organizer and sort of tour manager, roadie kind of guy. Anyway, so Nanker Felge are those 5 guys, and sometimes including Ian Stewart as well, but although Stewart is not performing in the group, so Jagger, Richards, Jones, Wyman, Watts, sometimes Stewart. And they get this Nanker Felge name from a nanker, which means pulling a face, where you push your nose up and your eyes down, the kind of thing that adolescent guys do to amuse each other. And then they have a band friend who they lived with by the name of Jimmy Felge. And so they make this name up, Nanker Felge, as a group composition. And what they do with the song Stoned is they take a song called Green Onions by Booker T and the MGs. That was the Memphis, ended up being the Stax sort of house band, part of the Memphis sound a little bit later in the 60s. Booker T and the MGs. This had been a number 3 hit in the US, number 1 on the R&B charts in August of 1962. They take the song and they kind of rework it their own way and they call it Stoned. Why are they doing this? Because the A side, the publishing is going to John Lennon and Paul McCartney. But the B side, the publishing will all go to them. And when publishing is determined, you don't determine it on the basis of whether people like the A side more or the B side more. It's a 50-50 split. So by doing this, by reworking an existing tune and sort of taking it beyond the realm of copyright so they can put their own name on it, they're able to get money out of this single so that when they're promoting the A side, they're actually making money off the B side. So the Nanker Felge thing is something we're going to want to watch in these first couple of weeks of the course as being the first sort of forays into original songwriting, although, as we've said, not so original. Well, having brought out these 2 singles, Come On and I Want to Be Your Man, in January of 1964, the Rolling Stones bring out an EP which for Americans who are unfamiliar with the EP format means an extended play single with 2 songs on each side. So you get 4 songs. In this case, the songs are a Chuck Berry song, Bye Bye Johnny, a Barrett Strong song called Money, an Arthur Alexander song called You Better Move On, and Poison Ivy, which was a second version they recorded, having not been particularly happy with the first version, as we said before. The song Fortune Teller was also recorded during some of these sessions, but not released either. We talked about Fortune Teller just before. So again, this was recorded in Decca in the summer of 1963 and released in January 1964. It went to #1 on the British EP chart. That first EP was the first #1 record that the Rolling Stones had in January of 1964. Basically unknown in the United States, a #1 record in the UK in 1964. Well, it had only been in December that the Beatles were unknown in the United States. So it wasn't until January into February that the whole British invasion, Ed Sullivan Show, all of that happened. But anyway, Rolling Stones doing quite well and meeting their mark for trying to get a #1 record. Well, to follow up on that, they bring out in the UK in February of 1964 their version of the Buddy Holly song called Not Fade Away. That song had been released as the B-side to the Buddy Holly single Oh Boy back in October of 1957 on the Brunswick label. It's backed with a song called Little by Little in the UK release. And again, it's another Nanker Felge tune, which also gives songwriting credit to Phil Spector. It's based on a Jimmy Reed song. Jimmy Reed was a Chicago blues and R&B singer from the early 1960s, late 50s, early 1960s. Anyway, the Jimmy Reed song is called Shame, Shame, Shame. That had been released in March of '63, so about a year earlier. Had been gone to #52 in the US charts on a VJ label. So they take Shame, 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 they rework it, and it becomes the song Little by Little. Again, because it allowed them to get publishing on the B-side as Nanker Felge while they pushed Not Fade Away on the A-side. So that song in February of '64 goes to #3 in the UK, and in March they released their first single in the United States. It's Not Fade Away as the A-side, but now the B-side is no longer Little by Little, but it's I Want to Be Your Man. Remember, I Want to Be Your Man and Come On had never been released in the United States. That was strictly a UK affair. So they take what they think are their 2 strongest sides, Not Fade Away and I Want to Be Your Man, and that's what they release. In the wake of the Beatles' first success, the British invasion, all that's happening over here, and Not Fade Away goes to a not very impressive #48 in the American charts. It wouldn't be too much long after that the Beatles would have the top 5 slots in the American charts. The Rolling Stones still struggling at #48. And so we see that there's going to be a lot of work to be done to be able to promote the group in the United States. But of course, Andrew Lowe Oldham is just the guy to do that work. Interestingly enough, some of this music recording during the Not Fade Away, Little by Little session, especially the song Little by Little, is supposed to have Phil Spector on maracas, Gene Pitney on piano, or another story has Gene Pitney on maracas, Alan Clark hitting a glass with a coin, and Graham Nash is supposed to be on this recording, though it's undetermined what he did. Who knows how much of this is true? These stories sort of, people in the rock business like to tell stories. But now, having thought about these first singles and EPs, let's explore the group's success in the UK and their struggle for success in the US during 1964.